Right, I think let's just get started. What do you think? They'll be here?
Sure.
They'll be here. Hopefully. Okay. Well, we usually have public comment at the beginning. Do you have anything you'd like to say before we start?
Yeah. First thing I'd like to say is that it was interesting going from the meeting that was held at the senior center and just stopping off at Sam's Pizza and sitting there and eating a slice of pizza and looking at the street on the basis of what the gentleman talked about. And what struck me more than anything else was his discussion of increasing the width of sidewalks and making one, and this was something when I initially heard it, making it one lane going through the city. And and certainly at this hour, maybe this may be after peak time and so on, but there is no question that there's excess capacity as far as automobiles are concerned. And there quite frankly would be a very nice addition if people did have more space to walk on the sidewalks. I think that would make a huge difference and create a wonderful impression of the downtown. As far as the overall concern with what you folks are doing and changing lots and lot lines and so on, and quote unquote increasing density, I have some issues with that. I still don't believe that you can enforce with the buildings, whatever the building department. I just see that as being very unrealistic.
Dennis, why don't you sit there at the end, and then Adam will be more easily able to film.
You don't want to film my back? Good idea, Bob.
You
Keep going, Arnie.
Enforce?
Yeah, I don't see how that.
To enforce?
Yeah, I don't see how that's possibly going to work. Yeah, I mean, I still believe that you're going to have neighbors spying on neighbors and so on and so forth. The other thing that I would take issue with were the hours that was recommended, 8 to 8.
Oh, you're talking about home business right now?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I think the hours of 8 to 8, I think that's another intrusion on folks who are living in a neighborhood. If you want to have a home business, well, fine, then you can do it during normal business hours. But 8 to 8, I think, is extending the hours beyond what is, I think, reasonable. I do like some of the suggestions that you made in terms of talking about restrictions. In other words, if you're going to have a new structure, that you consider the green space of the neighboring buildings. That if in fact you're going to do something that is being done within the character of the neighborhood. In other words, you don't put up a high-rise in the middle of whatever.
Cherry Street.
And there were certain parameters. I don't have that piece of paper in front of me, I'm sorry to say, but the parameters that you suggested, and I think which you read off, Jim, at the last meeting, along those lines, the so-called quote restrictions and ideas, I think that part is very much to the point. But one concern that I think most people have is that you say that this is for, quote, sustainable Northampton. And what is it about the way things are being done now? Why do we have to have this whole topic to begin with? What is so out of balance that we need to say that this is our zone, our lot lines and so on are unsustainable? To me, unsustainable means that we have a healthy infrastructure. That means we have roads that aren't beat up, and things along that line. So that would be my public comment.
Thanks.
Adam, do you have anything off to add?
Not at this time. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Arnie.
Okay. Chickens?
There's our chicken team.
Does everybody have their copy of this?
Yeah.
Or if not, you could grab one at the front. Okay, so here we are, back at Chickens after a very long,
Perhaps we'll be able to
Hiatus.
dispose of it this evening?
Maybe.
maybe, or get very close to it, yeah.
Should we just read through it?
So, just to recap, we kind of for a long time, Jim and I worked in the background on this. We had a few different meetings with the chicken advocates. We had meetings with the health department. We had meetings with, through the health department, we got several rounds of public input from the enforcement officer, zoning enforcement officer. Who else did we get input from? Doug McDonald, the city stormwater coordinator. We got some input from Carolyn and Wayne. And then finally, the very last thing that we did is we have gotten some input from the Agricultural Commission. And so, just to remind you kind of how we started, we had started by meeting with the chicken folks, and we had given them what I sent out to you, which was a summary of research. You don't need it today, but it's just sort
Just
of
need these
for
pages
general
in it.
reference. And we had also sent them kind of like a bullet pointed summary that we said, use this as you consider what you want this chicken ordinance to look like. What do you want to be proposed? And they pretty much sent back to us the bullet pointed summary that we had given them. So that ended up being kind of our working framework. Alyssa didn't really make any changes from the summary we had given her. And then so then we just kept iterating from there and getting more and more input. So what I sent out to the committee was the clean quote unquote version, which isn't clean, but it has fewer comments. And then just in case there's any curiosity about trying to retrace the source of any single thing, I have a copy that has like every comment since the very beginning. So if we need to do that, so should we just go through it? I mean, it's only a page and a half at this point, so it might
Sure.
make sense to just go line by line.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. The proposed framework. The keeping of, it may or may not actually be an ordinance. Wayne had some other idea of maybe where to put it that wasn't quite a chicken ordinance, but that's just sort of a technicality, so I think we should just go past that. Wherever it goes in the ordinances. The keeping of domestic female fowl is permitted in all zones as an accessory use to any principal use subject to the standards of this section. So this is to replace the current requirements which allow I think it just says 3 fowl, up to 3 fowl in any district.
Ducks and hens is actually specified.
Is it ducks and
Yeah.
hens? Okay.
And other,
Well,
it's
no.
female
Female
fowl.
fowl.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's if you have, I think, less than an acre, and then if you have over an acre, there's another option that you can go through agricultural provisions.
Right.
So the keeping of, so the agricultural provisions, by the way, would still stay. If you had a larger property, you could
You can have hundreds
You
of
could get
fowl.
more chickens through those other provisions that are in place today. So this is really just for backyard chicken raising, the smaller properties. So, sorry, the keeping of 12 or fewer adult female chickens or capons, which is a male, is permitted on a lot, and that's for the reason. Sorry, now I just need to say where that came from. The capons is a suggestion from the Agricultural Commission that we can consider. That was for people who want to raise birds for meat. They wouldn't be slaughtered on site. They would have to be brought like to a farm or something to be slaughtered. But if you wanted to do that and not have chickens for eggs, that would be a
The
possibility.
capons don't crow? Is that?
They
No.
do.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. I looked, so I was wondering where that came from. So I looked it up, and they are roosters that have been altered, and so, but they still have their intention to make noise.
So they do make noise.
Yeah. I mean, that's the information. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I just did a quick Google.
They're castrati.
Yes.
roosters.
And maybe they're angry about that.
They have issues.
Okay. So well, maybe.
So I had a flag about that, because
Okay.
obviously the whole
So I think
idea
capons-
about
but the-
roosters.
But at the
Or,
moment, we have to take capons out if we said no roosters because of the noise. That's why that no
I don't
roosters
think
needs to be in there.
technically, I guess they are a rooster. Yeah, okay, well, we could just get rid of it.
Okay.
The keeping of female fowl other than chickens is allowed by special permit subject to a finding by the planning board that the proposed fowl will have adequate space, water, and other necessary resources. This came from a conversation also in the Ag Commission where they were a little bit concerned about how like ducks are actually like totally different than chickens and they have all these water requirements and then like a turkey is just huge. And so there are
That's fine.
a
That's
lot
fine.
of, yes, go on.
Huge flag.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the planning board making a decision about whether or not there's adequate space for fowl to
Did
be
the
in
Ag
a property.
Commission do that, or they don't really have
They don't have special permit granting
any
authority.
granting authority?
But I don't know why it really matters, because I guess I get, and I think a lot of my comments about this is going to be, why does the city want to get involved about the care of the animals?
Mhm.
Because if a duck needs lots of water, then someone who has a duck is going to need to know that and live in the appropriate location. And so why should the city be involved in making the decision about whether you have, you know, a tiny pond or a really big pond, and therefore you have maybe enough space for a duck or not? But I think more directly, it's really about, I don't think it's a special permit role for the planning board to decide about whether animals have enough space, and we don't have any requirements on the books for any other animal in the city that relates to, you know, this kind of accessory pet thing.
Right.
So, I mean, for horses
Yeah.
we do for obvious reasons because they need to roam, but for pigs and their, or you know, those kind of things, we have space. But for chicken and, you know, if people can't be successful at raising their chickens, then they're not going to produce. So, is it really the city's responsibility to enforce, you know, the right kind of environment for your
Well,
animals?
I had a sort of similar, because the assumption was that if you're a serious farmer on something, an acre or more, there wouldn't be anything in the law that says you gotta take good care of your chickens or your cows or anything else. It's just assumed that you know what you're doing. So the assumption is that if it's less than an acre, they must not know what to do, and so the ordinance has to tell them what to do. I mean,
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of amateurs who are just gonna go out and get chickens because it's starting to get popular. A lot of this stuff was pulled from other ordinances.
Really?
We didn't totally make it up from scratch. Like a lot of
right.
other cities have this.
right,
So, and
And-
just on the point of the special permit, Greenfield actually has a special permit for small goats. So there are other cities in the area that do special permit for some animals in residential districts.
then their planning board issues those special permits.
I don't know who their special permit grant. I assume it is because it would be not typical to have an
Nobody but
agricultural
in Montana.
commission.
It's hard for me to imagine that, as Carolyn says, the city should be involved if people want to keep turkeys or ducks on a small piece of property. I just think it should not be.
So don't allow it at all
At
in
all.
any circumstance.
Yeah, you can
The
have all,
current
yeah,
law does allow for ducks though,
Yeah.
so we'd be getting rid of that.
okay.
Have there been, what's the experience with ducks? Have there been issues? Does
I
anybody
don't-
keep ducks?
No, I have not heard of any ducks. That doesn't mean that they're not there. But
I think sometimes people are allergic to chicken eggs and then they want to keep ducks,
Hmm.
especially because duck eggs are really expensive to buy. So it's a unique circumstance, but that's the one case where I've heard it come up as being like an equity issue.
But don't you
Where-
think someone's going to do the research to say, what do I need for a duck? What do I need for a chicken? And because if they don't provide the right thing for a duck, they're not going to get eggs, right? Because the duck won't be happy.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know the answer to your question. The context of the discussion in the Ag Commission was more about the water pollution of ducks. Because you've got to like keep water, like keep a certain area fed with water and you keep the water kind of fresh, like going.
I think we
So-
started out with just chickens, we should stick with just chickens.
We have ducks, because my kids wanted ducks, and then their grandfather dropped off 2 ducks. That's a whole nother story.
No, but really, so what did you do? So how did you keep them?
They were, the 2 of them were smaller than my fist when they arrived. They
They
were
were lean.
this big when they left. And we had a rabbit hutch. That we had created this gigantic rabbit hutch. And we had an old kid's swimming pool. You know, one of those little tortoise-shaped things. And the whole thing was only a year worth because they just got too big and too problematic. But we, yeah, my kid was 12 or 11, and she'd been researching it online, what kind of duck to get. And Grandpa finds these 2 ducks and brings them. And,
Thanks,
and of
thanks,
course,
Gramps.
one's a male, one's a female too, as we turns out. So it was a real
Turns
big
out.
sex ed thing down the road. So anyway, we had them in this rabbit run was the square footage of this table. I mean, a little bigger, and that's where we had them, and they got really big, and
So I
Do
appreciate
you have a
that.
pond for them?
we had this big plastic.
The
Big
tortoise pool.
plastic.
That was
The
The-
tortoise
you see,
swimming
yeah, the tortoise swimming pool. It was this deep, but it was this far across, and they were very happy for a long time, I think. And then but anyway, they got
And then,
mature.
so, that's
This-
great.
this
And
probably
then they
isn't
went
relevant.
away, and you had no interaction with the city in the course of any of this, is that correct?
Yeah, that would be true, counselor. I had
Yeah,
no.
and that's kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the case with the
So-
chickens, is people are just doing whatever they want anyway, you know. But we have heard from the chicken folks that they would like to not constantly operate illegally.
I'm all with you for the
No,
chicken
but why
coop.
not leave it at 3 ducks as it is now?
You want to
That'd
do
be,
that?
I mean,
that'd be
I
fine.
guess the goat thing is different, I think, because goats are bigger animals. They do take up more space, and, you know, I know people have goats as pets. But I just see that as something
The
different.
keeping of 12 or fewer adult female chickens or 3 ducks is permitted on a lot.
That's fine.
Okay. Then we're going to get rid of the special permit for anything.
Yep.
That line is gone.
So let me just clarify. So if right now, I think had been a question at one point about guinea fowl. So that would go away
That is
unless
away.
you were on a farm and you can have
Yeah,
whatever
nature.
animals
The
you want.
guinea fowl, yeah, we did research on that, and
Yeah.
they are definitely louder.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we heard, I think, here at
Yeah.
one meeting at one point.
And-
I've heard them, and they're very loud.
And we only really heard one very adamant person who felt strongly about guinea fowl. The vast majority of the input that we've gotten are just people who want chickens,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Right.
They just want hens,
This really was
and
chicken
really,
driven.
and they really just want like in the range of 8 to 10, you know, maybe 12 at most. But like we're not. We did have a few outliers of people who really were pushing for higher numbers,
Right.
like up to 20 or 30. But really, most people would be accommodated within the numbers
Yeah.
that we have here.
So if someone were to ask us, what's magic about 12 chickens and 3 ducks, where'd you come up with those numbers?
12 eggs in a dozen?
How would we respond?
Well, I can tell you the story of how we came up with the number, and you can tell me what you think the response should be. It started becoming kind of a balancing act between wanting to get people more, wanting to meet the needs of the majority of the people who we were hearing from, who wanted in the range of really 7 to 8, sometimes 10. To do that in a way to meet those needs while also not allowing people to get to the numbers that would become a nuisance. So it kind of became more of a subjective discussion. At what point does it kind of become a nuisance? And we had a couple of discussions with different people. We had a discussion with, what was his name at the health department? Ben Wood at the health department. And he felt pretty strongly. We kind of almost negotiated with him the case. So we were kind of voicing what we had heard from the chicken folks. And
We
he
were
was,
being chicken advocates.
we were being chicken advocates, and he was negotiating on the other end, saying, well, but, and so that was kind of, it was sort of a back and forth where he felt really that more than 12 would potentially start to become a nuisance, but he felt like 12 was a good number. And incidentally, so it was really sort of a process of talking it through. Incidentally, I found out just recently that Greenfield allows 12 chickens. I don't know if that is helpful
So
to us.
that's a good answer. So that shows that we got lots of
Yeah.
input and went through a whole lot of process.
Yeah.
to Come up with this number. We didn't just pick it out of the
Right,
number of
exactly.
eggs.
Which is
Yeah.
why I knew there was a
Yeah.
lot of thought. I
That's
just
very
was curious to have it reconstructed.
And there's another thing. That's how they tend to sell them. It's by
By the dozen?
By the
By-
6 dozen,
Oh.
every 6, right?
Oh, okay.
so people end up with those. They'll start with those numbers, and they'll probably have a rooster in there.
No, they won't.
So
No, but that's part. That's where the roosters will show up.
Yeah.
Well, so just to point this out, the highlighted word adult here, that is the reason that you're limited to 12 or fewer adult female chickens. So if you get chicks, or if you have chicks, that's kind of
Yeah.
that's okay. They're
Yeah,
not counted.
As sort of the replacement of the
Yes, exactly.
And that was the other reason
Or if you
for
get
the-
some, but some of them turn out to be males, and then they end up, having them
Yeah,
move off the
that's right.
property, so they don't keep
Having to move off the property.
To the neighbors.
Males and
They're
put it off
just
the property
roaming.
again.
Are you guys insecure?
Well, and that's actually another reason for the bigger number is that chickens are productive for only so many years, and there was a lot of people, because they are considered pets, wanted to keep them on, didn't want to slaughter
Yeah.
them and eat them.
They wanted to pasture them
You're right.
and have them
So,
as a pet in their own yard, to a point.
so if you want to have a productive flock and also keep your older
Retirees.
chickens- so retirees,
In the
like
home.
Bob, so we can
So, amongst the chicken lobbyists that you met with, how many would you say are interested in the pet part of chickens, and how many are really looking to?
It was about 50-50, I thought. There was a good amount of people who said, hey, this is great education for my kids. We want 6 or 7 chickens. We want to then be able to keep them until they die, which means that they're not going to have a really productive flock if they're going to pasture all their chickens. We did a whole brain exercise to figure that out, and we're like, oh gosh, if you pastured all your chickens and you were trying to meet all the needs of
Yeah.
a family of 4, we made all these assumptions,
You
you'd end
came
up
up
with
with
like
the number
30
of
chickens.
24, right?
It was 24, yeah. So we're like, okay.
She did a whole
Yeah, we did a whole
calculation.
spreadsheet to try to figure out if you could actually meet their needs. But yeah, so there's some families that want to. People who are really serious about making eggs, though, will end up having their chickens slaughtered, and then we'll eat them. They'll bring them to a farm, have them slaughtered, and eat them, or maybe have a farmer pasture them for them off the site. Those are their options.
Quiet.
Or if it should die of natural causes on the premises. That's
Which
okay.
does actually happen kind of a lot, because predators do manage to dig under into the coops and stuff.
Okay.
Anyways, so that is that story. So for more than 12 adult fowl, see home occupations. There actually aren't any home occupations provisions, I don't think, that would actually govern this. This was an idea that was sort of thrown out as for those who want to have more, in order to, say, sell eggs to their neighbors or something like that. In really well-controlled conditions, do we want to have some way of allowing that? But then we would need to actually write the home occupations provisions, which there aren't any.
I wouldn't really say that would be a home occupation. And then I would also think you might, this is a big giant step from what we have. I would say, don't go down that route.
Yeah.
12 is a
Yeah.
lot to have on if you think, this is going to be anywhere from a 2,000 square foot lot to a 20,000 square foot lot. You're going to have
Yeah.
12 chickens. So you having the allowance for more, I'm not sure it's necessary at this point.
Right.
And all these people are
Okay,
gonna be
it sounds,
sharing their eggs
everybody's
with
nodding,
their
so I'm going to
neighbors.
interpret that
Not
as
indulging in
scratching
crass
that
commerce.
provision. Okay.
By farm.
Chickens must be provided adequate living space as follows. At least 6 square feet of external enclosed and covered coop area per chicken, at least 12 square feet of external pen area per chicken. Some of these numbers there was some dickering about them, but this is what we ended up with based
Fine
on
with me.
recommendations, and I think the Pioneer Valley, the Backyard Chicken Association, were in
Fine
favor
with
of
me.
this.
You do the research, I believe you.
I still go back to why do we care? We don't care about dogs and cats and their living space. And I think it would be a nightmare to enforce. And I get there may be other communities that are micromanaging the amount of space, but, I can just sort of imagine someone
The
coming
building
up and
inspector go out there
saying,
and measure that chicken coop.
yeah. And, whether
You
it's...
can then count the chickens.
Yeah, you'd have to count the chickens and multiply by 6 and
Yeah.
determine if you're in violation.
Well, I think this isn't written to get rid of chickens. This is to protect chickens. So if Artie's laughing, but if I'm not taking care of my chickens, there's no way for the city to come in. If I didn't give them adequate space, I have them staying in shoe boxes. You're just like, this is appalling. It smells terrible. This is a way of, the city being able to say, look, you
But
can't have
what's
chickens.
appalling? What about the people who have 10 cats?
Well,
Some
we should
cities
probably
limit
have-
that.
Right, but what I'm saying is we don't. And people in apartments have Rottweilers. And people, have all sorts of, they might have birds.
But
Not
nothing
these kinds
does
of birds.
kick in. If people aren't treating their animal properly or something.
But then someone would make a
That's not
case
sort
though.
of-
I mean, I
Animal
think
Yeah.
control officer
having
would
this in
step
zoning is just exceeds way beyond what I
Yeah.
think the zoning is really supposed to be about. And I think that it's either a Board of Health issue where there might be standards that the Board of Health can go and enforce. So maybe you can say you have 12 chickens, and then maybe there's a Board of Health code that says, here's how you have to treat your
How about
chickens.
the
But
Board
this
of
should not be a
Health?
Louis
Right.
Hasbro
That's
thing.
fine.
May
Considering
promulgate,
that,
just wanted to use the word promulgate, standards for the health of chickens, something along
Well,
those
but,
lines.
but maybe there's already a
For the
section
care?
for the treatment of animals in Northampton, which is
Mhm.
really more generically,
Yeah.
I think, where it should be located, and I don't know if that's the case, but I just feel like if we're all of a sudden pinpointing and
Or
really
you can have
caring
6
so
square
much
feet.
about chickens, why don't we care that much about any other animal? Like even for horses, we don't care if you have adequate water or shelter for your horse or your goat, and it's up to you to take care of your animals.
Yeah, there are people you can complain to the state about inhumane treatment of animals. That's a whole nother process that has nothing to do with city government.
With zoning, for
With
sure,
zoning, yeah.
but, yeah.
Yeah, so promulgate that.
Okay. I'm gonna just take the note with Karen. So what do others think?
I tend to agree that if somebody's, I mean, I think the dog and cat analogy is valid. If somebody's got 10 cats, their neighbor may start to really have a problem with that, but I don't know that the zoning is the way to do it. But
Yeah, I mean, provided, like Jim was saying, this is, you're coming from this aspect of the protection of the chickens, right? I mean, it's looking out for the, not being cruel to these animals. And then
No cutting their heads off.
yeah, well, not until it's time. Like putting a dog down, I suppose. I don't know if that's what that's like. But so so who's taking care of that? We don't have to be the keepers of that, perhaps. But it'd be good to know that somebody is.
okay.
Okay. Yeah.
In when you asked for public remarks, one of my concerns was enforcement by the building inspector. And I think this is a classic example of, you're going to ask a building inspector to get involved with this, and it's,
This is actually a pretty easy provision if we were to have them do that because it's measurable.
And he's got nothing else
And
to do.
he actually has looked over this. So
Oh,
there's
yeah.
nothing in here that Louis doesn't think can be enforced, just so you know. But I'm fine with the consensus of getting rid of this if it
That's
seems
what I
like
think
too
we
much.
should do.
Well, I think let's send it over to what committee, the health department, and ask that they,
Well, or you could, I guess what I would suggest, you're coming to the end of your time frame. I
Yeah.
would say, here's what we put together so far, and based on all of our
Yeah,
research and all that stuff.
Right.
And then the various committees, so if most of it goes to Board of Health, and then there's just one quick zoning piece, then whoever is gonna be addressing the Board of Health stuff could look at it.
right,
If fowl are allowed to roam free in the yard, owner must either provide adequate fencing or landscaping to contain the fowl in the yard or provide supervision to prevent roaming and nuisance to neighbors. This was something that was recommended to us by Louis. And he also asked us
That
to add
seems fine with me.
this next provision. No person owning or keeping fowl within the city shall allow such fowl to roam at large upon the land of another, except if it is on the premises of another person with his or her permission. Nor shall they allow such fowl to roam at large upon any portion of a public highway
No chickens in.
or any public property.
Would it be easier just to say you need to maintain all your fowl on your property? And then,
Simplify.
and not go into the details? I mean, if I let Dennis have my chicken for a day, you think, you don't have to institute that, right?
No, if you rent Dennis's yard for your chickens, that'd certainly be covered.
Right, but why would you have to write it down?
I
Like, he's
understand.
okay with it,
Yeah.
why couldn't
Yeah.
I just loan him my
Yeah.
chicken for the day?
I understand why Louis wants to, it says
I
no
think
chickens in the road.
That's in there just to, I think we originally did have it that way, and it made people who wanted chickens feel a little bit nervous about the fact that it didn't seem to allow for the ability, for a couple of us to have shared yards. Even though it seems obvious, I think that was just put in to sort of clarify because we had the response of, but what about this situation?
Right, there was a lot of people saying we'd like to share chickens with our neighbors.
How about, I could simplify it though, and I could just say, you must maintain fowl on your property except, by the
Or your neighbor's
permission of the
property
other
with their
owner.
permission. Period.
Or your neighbor with permission. Or another with permission.
Yeah.
So
But we should keep there about no chickens in the road, they don't make the weekend.
Well, if they're on your property, they're not.
Yeah, then they're not on the road.
But so, what's
Okay. So simple.
why would it matter if they're roaming free in your yard as long as they're fenced or landscaped?
Say it again?
I mean, why would you have both of those?
Because if there's no fencing, then you need somebody to keep track of them.
You need to just, it's saying that you don't have to have fencing or landscaping. That's
But-
one way to meet the intent, and the other way is that you're actually watching the
With a
chickens.
But are there really folks out there that don't have fencing and have chickens?
Yes.
Yeah.
They
There are
have
people who are
coops.
like letting the chickens sort of like
Free
just
range.
Oh.
free range around the neighborhood.
But I mean, no, so I guess I'm going to 3 and
That could be
what
free
could
range.
should have been
Free
4.
range doesn't, don't fence
Still
them
be
in.
inside.
Yeah, I guess that is 4. Yeah.
So, why does it matter if you're required to have a fence on your yard or maintain the chickens on your yard in some measure? Why does it matter if they're roaming around your fenced yard?
Sorry, I'm not following you. But it's not requiring you to have fencing or landscaping. It's
No, I'm not saying that. It seems like 3 and 4 are addressing similar concerns. No person owning fowl within the city
Oh, I
shall
see,
allow
'cause you
them
must
to
maintain
roam
fowl on your
at
property.
large. Right. So I think you could probably consolidate all of that and just say,
Just keep 4 and get
all
rid of
fowl
3.
have to be contained by some measure on your yard, and you don't have to have supervision of roaming chickens within your fenced yard.
You can just get rid of number 3 entirely and
I
keep
see what you're
4.
saying. So basically, we could simplify it all to, you must maintain fowl on your property.
Right.
That's
It's your
what you're saying.
responsibility. Yeah.
Because we really don't care how they maintain them on their
That's
property.
right.
I see. Okay. What do you think of that? Does that seem okay? Alright, so we're simplifying the whole thing so you just maintain fowl on your property except by permission of another property owner. Okay. All coops shall meet the following requirements: be predator proof, provide water at all times, be regularly cleaned to control dust, odor, and waste, and not constitute a nuisance, safety hazard or health problems for animals or surrounding properties. Provide adequate protection from cold and rain/moisture, as well as adequate ventilation. Be built on or sited so that water drains away from the coop.
I see that as all Board of Health if they want to get into it and not zoning.
What
For the
about-
same set of reasons about micromanaging people's animals, right?
What about the part about be built and sited so that water, well, I guess that's for the chickens.
Be built, but what, I mean,
So we
If
could
someone
send
did-
some of these to the Board of Health as a recommendation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they can do whatever
Yeah.
they want.
yeah, because I mean, I could see a huge problem with someone saying, well, I saw some rain get into the coop the other day, so they're not taking care of their chickens. You know what I'm saying? And,
Right.
is rain really bad for chickens? I mean, when they're really free range, they're really free range.
What I'll do is I'll consolidate the things that we're getting rid of, and I'll put them in a separate section for the Board of Health that we send on as
Okay.
recommendations for consideration to accompany the ordinance.
And that'll be everything through 5, all of
That'll
5,
be
right?
the first part of 2, and then that'll be all of 5.
And I just want to add
Sorry,
that
2 and 5.
these are, the source is chicken advocates for this, because they really care about the birds. That's where this is
Right.
coming from. So it's not about it's not about the neighbors being able to see what somebody's doing, it's about people coming from
Being
perspective
pro
of-
chicken, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
Just
think
how
that
you do
makes
it.
sense. You know how to do it, and you want to make sure other people that have
Yeah.
chickens don't ruin it for the
Right.
rest of
Well,
you.
so-
But the same thing you could apply to dogs. I mean, I know how to take care of my dog, but
Right.
there are a lot of people that don't,
Sure.
and they
Some
still
of the
have them.
chicken advocates definitely were not in favor of doing too much regulation, and a lot has actually been stripped out since
Oh,
the
yeah.
beginning. This
Yeah.
is sort of the bare
Yeah, I
bones.
was curious about the backyard fowl association. I would think, of course, these aren't your normal libertarian farmer types. You don't need to tell me what to do. They're obviously different, but it still is not the kind of language you would expect an agriculturalist to want to have some authority tell them what to do.
But they could be a good resource for people, you
Yeah,
know, if,
that's
you
right.
know, neophytes who don't know how to do it. I mean, clearly
Could
there's
be
a lot of
a
knowledge
great,
there.
you know, handbook, backyard fowl.
So it seems like the next paragraph
That's a step back
also
for the coop.
goes with the Board of Health stuff then, during daylight hours, the adult
Yeah.
Then-
I think
fowl
that's
shall have
good.
access to the
Yeah.
coop, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Okay, coops. Coops that do not exceed 6 feet in height are not required to meet setback or open space requirements for detached accessory structures. However, all coops must be sited at least 4 feet from the property line. This requirement may be waived by letter of permission from the affected property owner. No coop may be sited closer than 20 feet to an existing residential structure occupied by someone other than the fowl owner, custodian, or keeper, except by consent in writing from the affected property owner. I'll stop there because it goes to the next page. So,
We've battled on a bunch of issues about getting this permission from your neighbor. And this does it twice. You think that's a problem, Carolyn?
Well, I guess there are a couple things. One is, yeah, I mean, I think the whole idea for zoning, obviously, so you have some uniformity and detached structures. I mean, it sort of blends in with the first issue, which I have a little bit of concern about sort of being laissez-faire about coops, that they're not treated as structures, because you could have a 6-foot-high, 50-foot-long coop on your property, and that's a big impact.
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line? Why is a 6-foot-high coop okay and not considered a structure, when almost everything else under the sun is considered a structure? And we already have a 4-foot setback from the property line for detached structures, so I think that's ample. And I think sort of mixing, you know, the reason why I say that is because we get questions all the time, well, does this count as a structure? Is that a structure? And so I think you either have to say it's a, you know, I can understand if you have a little tiny box. I know my neighbors have a little tiny thing, but it's never that close to the property boundary. It's never 4 feet. They're moving it all over the place.
right.
So it's not really an issue, but 6 feet high is starts to be a tall structure.
If there are no,
Okay.
I assume you can have an unlimited number of detached accessory structures.
Up to 1,000 square feet of footprint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that seems fair.
Would anyone
So,
ever want any,
I
a
think
coop
we
any
must-
higher than like 4 feet or 5? I mean, where did?
None of the advocates mentioned wanting anything.
a lot of the
much
time
higher.
people do cite it right at the property line though. That's definitely fairly common.
Right. Back where we were talking about, oh, well, we're gonna eliminate
Well, what's wrong with 4 feet? I mean, that's not that far from
Yeah.
the property line.
No, it's not.
And that's
4
what this,
feet's
that's
fine,
what
that's
the,
what it
I
already
think I
is.
might have
URA
thought at
districts
the
are.
time that it was farther. I might have actually read the
Okay.
table wrong.
well, from the front lot line, it's 15. But
Right.
anything from the side or the rear is 4, so obviously it's much closer.
That seems weird. So I'll get rid of those two sentences at the front, and then the waiving by permission. What about this next part? The coop may not be sited closer than 20 feet to an existing residential structure occupied by someone other than blah blah, the fowl owner.
Well, what's the premise?
I think the intent is so that that if you have a house next to somebody, let's say you're on a bunch of small lots, and you have a house next to somebody who decides to put chickens in, even if they've met the setback requirements,
At
It's
least 20 feet
possible-
from your house.
that their chicken coop could be actually still sited within like 8 feet of your house. Well, no.
Well, we do have a lot of pre-existing nonconformities.
Yeah. So if they were to go 4 feet from your house, and if your house was conforming to, let's say you're in URB, so you're 15 feet, then that would be
Is the issue
19
noise?
feet.
Do you
Could be
think?
It's
odor.
more smell. It's more odor than noise. It could be noise, but if you turned the coop around and made sure it didn't like face your door, like you know, so the
Well,
opening.
so if the issue is odor, why wouldn't it be better to say something about odor instead of distance?
I think is there nothing about odor?
Because then we get into
Well,
sniffers.
distance is our realm, right?
Yeah, I know, but I guess, well, we have noxious odor sections,
Well,
and
that's true, yeah.
I mean, people can have obviously argued about that, but I don't know. I mean, I guess you could say, I mean, if you think 20 feet is adequate to address odor, and that makes sense, then maybe it does make sense to say all coops have to be 20, 4 feet from the property line and at least 20 feet from a residential structure, and leave it at that, without having the neighbor say yay or nay. I mean, I
Okay.
suppose, I'm sure informally someone could say, would you mind if I put it a little bit closer?
Right.
And if they really truly don't mind, I don't
Okay.
know that you need
They're
to
not
have the
gonna say
zoning.
anything.
Yeah, they're not
So
gonna say
should we be
anything.
reiterating the 4 feet, or even though it's already in the table?
We should.
Yes.
Okay. So all coops.
Well, or you could just say coops must meet the standard setbacks
No,
for
you wanna say it
accessory
right
structure.
here in the ordinance.
Because somebody's gonna be
Language.
reading
So,
about
But they gotta go into the
Okay.
thing.
Are all coops accessory structures? I mean,
Yes.
like you mentioned, the box with something in it, I guess, that moves around.
Yeah, I mean, anything, yes, I mean, we'd have to.
So we, like, nobody's gonna come up with a coop that isn't an accessory
MX Coop.
Right.
structure. Okay.
Okay. So we're gonna say at least 4 feet from the property line and 20 feet.
You say you don't want it attached to you.
You know, you might, then if you're gonna do
No.
it that way, I would say 15 from the front. Because
Yeah.
Like a
it
side.
should be 4
Right.
feet from the side and the rear.
Maybe
Or
we
else
could
reference
just say
the
must meet.
detached.
Yeah, I'll reference that and then just say which is 4 feet
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
side setback. So reference detached accessories.
But we should say that all chicken coops are accessory structures and have to be X feet
Yeah.
from the, according to such and such chapter.
Okay. Okay, so then we're gonna keep the no coop may be sited closer than 20 feet to an existing residential structure and get rid of the except by consent in writing
Yep.
Yes.
from the property owner.
Cause Peter could consent and and then he could sell me his house and I did
Yeah.
not consent.
Houses turning
Okay,
over.
so I guess that gets rid of the next sentence too then. In the case of multi-unit structures, consent
Yeah.
in writing must be obtained, that's just, they're
And then
working,
to
they're
keep
working
copies
it
of
out on
anything.
their own
You know,
Yeah.
copies of anything.
within the
landlord
property.
has to
Yeah, the
decide that.
landlord has to figure that out. The owner of the fowl shall, okay, we're getting rid of that then. Alright. Shorter and shorter it gets.
That's good.
Other provisions. Feed must be stored in a pest-proof container. I'm gonna stop right there. Does that seem fine?
I think it's all Board of Health stuff.
Yeah, why
Yeah.
is zoning doesn't care.
So we're saying that's a Board of Health. Owner shall ensure that shall ensure that water from the coop, run areas, and foul manure compost area does not directly enter city storm drains adjacent to the site. In addition, owners shall ensure that there is a vegetated area between the coop run and any location where runoff leaves the site. So this was basically a lot of stuff got condensed down into here to try to meet the city stormwater goals. This was what we ended up with after talking with Doug McDonald, and the Ag Commission was in support of
Yeah,
this.
so it's
as
fine
well.
to leave it in.
Maybe you could simplify it and just say, no runoff from the coop or run areas all stormwater shall be contained on site from runoff to coop areas or run areas. Because you could contain it in any number of ways, probably. No one's supposed to be dumping directly into the city storm drain anyway, but this sort of reinforces it.
No, no harm. Peter.
So we're not allowing it to leave the site.
Right.
All must be contained on site. From the coop, run, and foul manure compost.
Right, because you wouldn't, even if it's not going to stormwater, you don't want people, you don't want it to run in your neighbor's yard either. You're not allowed to do that,
Okay.
as it is. So you could just say it all has to be contained.
So, owner shall ensure that water from the coop, all water from the coop, run areas, and foul manure compost area shall be contained on site.
Mhm.
Okay. Or else, maybe I should specify that it's stormwater. Or is it,
Yeah,
Water runoff.
Specify, stormwater.
okay. No foul manure may be put into household trash. All waste must be composted. This is actually fairly common practice for all waste to be composted, but I guess the discussions that this came out of was that if you're doing this in the name of sustainability in part, and then generating a bunch of extra trash that then needs to get picked up,
So this would be all animal waste.
Just your foul manure.
Well, yeah,
Generally, you
just-
do compost it on
Right.
site.
I still think that we shouldn't be regulating
Yeah.
it, because it was a common practice, people will do it, but for dog waste, we don't tell
Yeah, we
people
don't.
they
I
have
know,
to put
that's
their
what I was
dog
thinking
waste
too.
in.
I don't tend to put my dog waste in the household trash, I don't think they tell me not. I mean,
But the city does pick up dog waste, I mean, that's the thing, you dump it in a garbage can and it goes to the landfill. Maybe that's not the most sustainable thing to do, but it's not illegal.
Wow, it's a lot harder to compost dog waste than chicken waste, but we can get rid of it. I
Yeah,
mean, I
we're-
think most
Donnie
people are
doesn't
doing
care.
it anyways, so it seems like it's kind of just reiterating what's pretty much already happening. If a person's keeping chickens, they're managing the manure. Does that seem okay?
Well, I'm thinking that's, we may wanna encourage the chicken advocacy group to kind of gel and be, you know, like you were saying, Dennis, you know, that they could be a source of insight and advice, and that maybe some of these things could be handed out by them, and that they could be recommending that, you know, people in the city do that, that it's, rather than something that's regulated, something that's recommended by the chicken advocates.
And the Board of Health could sort of work
Well,
with them.
right,
and let
they could
people
sign
know.
off.
There's this reference to guidelines that are handed out when
Yeah.
you register with the Board of Health.
Yeah.
And Board of Health collaborates with
Yeah,
this association, come up
backyard
with.
chicken.
But that's not really a Board of Health matter, the household trash issue. All the other ones are. But this is the one that the Board of Health will not create regulation to make you compost rather than use the trash, because it has nothing to do with public health.
Right, but they can hand out
They could include it in your
guidelines that have been
guidelines.
developed by this group.
People
It's
wiser
just
than
some
us.
sort of best practices for managing your backyard fowl.
Okay.
And, you know, and it's common sense.
Managing your chicken.
Yes.
Okay.
Some people manage it better than others.
Registration. Fowl owners must register with the city's health department so that the city can take appropriate action in the event of a disease outbreak. I guess that based on the conversations we've been having, that would also go to the Board of Health.
Yeah.
My concern is that you read the chicken ordinance and you don't realize that you need to register. But I guess when you go to, yeah, how do you even know that you're supposed to do that then?
Well, you could, I guess, in zoning, say by right with registration from the Board of Health or something.
Kind of like getting a dog license.
Is this the
Yeah.
current practice? This,
Or maybe you could go out in the city census every year.
Yeah.
This
Chick-
was
got
chick-
chickens?
This was
Come
just
down to
something
Board of
that
Health?
Louis from the Board of Health wanted to do
Yeah.
based
it's
on
not in
just,
place now.
it's not in
No.
place now, no. So I think it was just to like keep track of like how many chickens are in the city and if there is something that happens.
There's bird flu.
I don't know.
No, that sounds
That's fine.
like a legitimate reason
Yeah.
to be
Well,
registered.
I think it's legitimate, but I guess the question is now how do we, if we're sending that to the Board of Health to make their own recommendations, and if you went and you read the zoning, how would you even know?
We'd have a line in here that says
Well, you
if
could
you have
have a
chickens, you gotta
footnote or
register with the
something,
Board of Health.
yeah,
So keep it.
yeah.
Yeah.
We skipped over slaughtering.
Oh, sorry.
That
'Cause
should stay.
I started editorializing on my piece of paper and I accidentally skipped it. So slaughtering is prohibited, I guess goes to the Board of Health as well?
Well, it could, but it also should be on-site slaughtering, because, I don't know, I mean, someone would,
On
maybe
site.
that's obvious, but,
No.
Well, I know people
it's
in other
not.
towns who have chickens, the butcher will come to their house,
Right.
and, you know, even in Hadley, and in South, oh yeah, the butcher comes, they come, and there's other places where you do have to bring them.
Got that big axe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of discussions, we went back and forth about it. The Ag Commission felt like it shouldn't be done on site. I think there's also maybe some health reasons why people should be slaughtering on site, and maybe some just upsetting your neighbor's kids reasons. So, I mean, it's contentious, but finally we got to the point
that's
where,
after the
You missed
Yeah,
the cafe chicken discussion.
The capons, which we chose
I'm
not
sorry,
to
so-
allow.
so what are we doing with this on-site slaughtering?
I
is
thought that was
prohibited.
fine.
And we should leave it in.
So leave it.
Would
I
be
don't know
on
if it,
site.
I think it might need to be in part of the Board of Health rules.
Okay.
Because I think that's a health
Seems
issue.
like
Okay,
it is.
that's fine.
That's what it's
Okay.
about, so.
Yeah.
Okay, that's going to the Board of Health in the separate section. But in the registration, we're keeping this, that
Yeah.
fowl owners must register with the city's health department. So maybe we can even like reference whatever regs they end up having. And upon registration, owners must sign that they've read the guidelines handed out by the health department. So we'll leave that, we'll just
Yeah.
let that be in both
Yeah.
sets. Okie dokie, next time we meet, we'll
Excellent.
have a cleaned up version that will be
Great.
ready to pass.
Good progress.
And I'd
Good
like
job.
to give Danielle a lot of credit for pulling that together. She has credited me with part of this.
Who knew?
We've
But you know,
both been through a lot.
we've been- we've both
You've
been
done a
working
lot
on it,
with the
but-
chickens too.
But I believe you may have had more prior experience with chickens than Danielle. Is that not
I
correct?
have done, and actually now I really don't want any.
Haven't been through this.
Having
We are
been
done
through
with
it,
chickens.
I think I was mildly interested before I
So
started.
which do we want to discuss less, chickens or King Street? Chickens on King Street. There we go.
No chickens in the road.
There we go.
We are musical.
But not on the first floor, only on upper.
Poop on the roof.
All right, this next bit is really fast. We hope. As Jim and I went through all of this chicken stuff and the initial research and all the stuff that we did at the beginning, we kind of just started seeing these themes and these bigger issues relating to urban agriculture coming up. And so we decided to just kind of summarize what those issues were, which is here. What is urban agriculture? What are some of the issues in urban agriculture? So there's community farms, there's commercial farms that are actually in the city, so the meadows. There's supplementary income, there's fertilizer and pesticide issues, there's urban livestock issues. And then we kind of summarized out of what we learned out of all that, and from this experience, what kind of recommendations we might be able to pass along to other boards, they're not really zoning related, that we can consider in our final report. One of the first things that we noticed is that we really didn't have a lot of guidance on agricultural issues. There's information in the Sustainable Northampton Plan about farmland as land, but there's not like a food systems chapter or something that's really talking about, agriculture and urban agriculture and food as a system in the city. And a lot of cities do have that in their sustainability plans. We don't. We would maybe recommend that somebody in the city could add an agriculture and food policy section to the Sustainable Northampton Comprehensive Plan. That somebody, maybe the Agricultural Commission, could expand its work to include urban agriculture. So like whose purview could urban agriculture be in the city? Somebody to really work on meeting the extreme need for community gardens in the city that's unmet, and other urban agriculture issues that might come up. We sort of formed ad hoc around this issue of the chickens, and we knew nothing about it. But maybe there could be some subset of some other committee or a new committee that could actually address explicitly urban agriculture issues. For example, maybe have a community gardens committee to work to to identify appropriate locations and establish more community gardens. We came across ordinances that limit application of manufactured fertilizers. Those are generally ordinances that don't apply to farmers, like agricultural land. They usually apply to like people's lawns, like on residential property where we see them. We found an example. Well, we found a bunch of examples, and we can always provide them if somebody picks this up and is interested in them.
And that also had to do with the fertilizers also often have pesticides mixed in with them, and people really aren't aware of what it is they're putting down on their lawns. And so then they start raising chickens, and they go around and pack, and they start eating the stuff. So it is a health issue.
And the issue with fertilizers is basically like over-application of fertilizers causes water pollution. And actually, it's really interesting, application of pesticides obviously can be problematic in any case, but in residential settings can mess up farmers who are trying to get organic certification. And then you sometimes see those going the opposite way, where residents get upset because farmers nearby are applying pesticides. So, you do see things. I mean, I haven't heard a lot of that in Northampton, but in other places you see some of those issues come up.
Hardware stores are gonna have to restock with new stuff.
But it's also, you see it even, like, one person uses Chemlon, and Chemlon comes in and sprays, but the person living next to them is trying to do organic fertilizers, and, it's an odd mix sometimes, when you go by somebody's house and they have little placards, no
Yeah.
dogs, no kids,
Right.
on the lawn, because Chemlon just came by.
Yeah.
Like, oof.
Well, not, it goes into the street too, because
Yeah.
they certainly are
Yeah.
liberal about their application,
Oh,
it
yeah.
seems.
And a lot of the time, what you'll see in the ordinances that people have is that they'll not completely outright ban it, but they'll severely limit it, the application of fertilizers, and they'll say only if, like, somehow you can show that it's really necessary or something like that. So it's sometimes, so that they do provide the ability if your soils are really bad or whatever to,
So that's something some future group is welcome to take up.
yeah, it might be something that like the city stormwater coordinator might be interested in looking into.
Do they monitor that stuff from the stormwater? Do you know if they, like on a runoff, do they actually
I don't know if
monitor?
they're doing any monitoring right now.
Especially after all the rain,
No, I don't think
it's not
so.
like a normal practice to yearly measure
Nitrogen loads or anything.
whatever,
like
yeah.
I bet
whatever.
they don't do fancy chemical tests runoff, but I bet they monitor for other things like oil.
Yeah, I know, obviously the drinking water, you get to. the
I
yearly
mean
report.
stormwater, I mean
That's what I mean, yeah,
stormwater.
so I wonder
But I
if
bet
do
they
it-
don't
that. Yeah, I
look
don't
for
think they-
trace elements
They
of heavy metals.
So how do these recommendations seem? Is this something that we could incorporate into the final
Seems fine to
report?
me. You can take out
How
the last
active
one,
is
it's gonna
the
make it
agricultural
Yeah, we
commission?
can kick out the last one.
How active is the agricultural commission? Are they weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, semi-monthly?
I think they're quarterly, aren't they?
Yeah, I think so. Well, except during the season, they don't meet at all.
So they
They're
meet
not
3
that
times a
active.
year.
They're not that, they're kind of,
Really?
Yeah, they're on time.
Well, that makes sense in the summer, but they meet quarterly?
I think it depends on what they're working on.
Okay.
Do they have any regulatory approval? Are they involved in any?
Not any regulatory approval, just policy pretty
So-
much, yeah. The one thing I was wondering is, we now have a new community garden, so, I don't know, whether you wanna, whether we need to
Where is
change it.
that?
At the Florence
Bean
Fields.
farm, Bean Island
right.
Farm.
Yeah.
The rec department runs it, right?
I think that there's still some parts of the city that might not be.
Well, but we might
totally
add in
well-served.
here, we're pleased to see the new community gardens at the Bean Farm and encourage the city to continue to look for satisfactory sites for community gardens.
Yeah, because it says here there's only one community garden.
Oh, yeah, I have to update it.
Is
So
that
we
gonna be
really
under
want
line
to
of
support
spread?
and encourage what's been going on about this.
And I think what we're talking about there is more like neighborhood community gardens.
Like the Monty Farm.
So somebody doesn't have to drive across town to monitor their plot, care for the plot.
Yeah, it's interesting because you get a lot of backlash about neighborhood community gardens.
How so?
People, because they don't think they're very sightly in their neighborhoods, and they don't want other people driving and tending their gardens and things like that.
I think,
Not in my backyard.
As somebody who lives-
I have a story as an aside. So you know Michael Doctor, who
Yep.
ran the food bank farm for years and years. He grew up in Montgomery County, in Kensington, Maryland, in a subdivision that had all sorts of restrictions. Your hedges could only, you couldn't do fences, all this stuff. His parents were agricultural enthusiasts, and to really stick it to the
The man.
suburban,
To the street.
the neighborhood association was supposed to enforce this. They grew corn in their front yard. And he just got it. No. I digress.
well, as somebody who lives next door to a community garden, or pseudo, the Montview Farm, that,
That's
Are-
not
are
a
we-
community garden
It's a
though.
little fun.
That's a
well,
farm.
I think they would describe themselves.
About half of it, front half was, and the back half was Ben and Newman.
Yeah.
Front half
There's
is-
Benny Nunes, as somebody who lives next door to all of that, people walking is fabulous. It's a wonderful thing.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying when the city has approached small parcels of land and we say, oh, this would be a great place for community gardens, there has been backlash to some degree in certain neighborhoods
Right.
about that. So it's not a slam dunk thing where every
Yeah.
time you see a vacant piece of property,
You can make it
everyone,
into a community
yeah.
garden. Right.
Well, I'm just saying that if if it's based on people walking to it, it's a lot more palatable. That's all. Because people did,
And things are changing.
Yeah.
People's attitudes about them might be starting to shift, but yeah, it's not. I think the thing here is that maybe, just having somebody systematically be addressing and
Look
thinking
at.
about community gardens and urban agriculture issues,
I
for
agree.
as long as people continue to be, increasingly enthusiastic about these things.
And we don't think the ag commission is the way.
They only meet 3 or 4 times a year, and they're really busy. And maybe I should actually even just take that out. Is that a bad suggestion, that it would be a subcommittee of the agricultural commission? Should it just be?
No,
I think that's where it
yeah.
should belong.
I don't think we can have multiple, we already have a hard time staffing commissions and actually getting people to volunteer to be
Yeah.
on commissions. So I think it would be really difficult to start creating a whole lot of new commissions, particularly when it's so related
Or
to
committee,
agriculture.
maybe.
But it does seem appropriate for us to encourage the continued search for
Oh,
places for community gardens.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's it on agriculture.